Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, marhaba, ciao, bonjour, namaste, jumbo, bienvenidos. Hey, my name is Jedley. Welcome to Reading with Your Kids. We're coming to you from the beautiful, wonderful, historical neighborhood of Reedville, located in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so very honored and absolutely delighted that you join us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. We do that by sharing fun, thoughtful, and thought-provoking conversations with fascinating people who just happen to be writing books for kids of all ages. You can join us in this mission by telling all of your family and friends about the show and letting them know that they can hear us on the WREB AM/FM 24/7 radio network. And they can find us on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Good Pods, Podcast Addict, Audible, CastBox, Player FM, wherever you find your favorite shows. We have two really fascinating guests for you today. First up, Maria von Lieshout. She's going to be here to celebrate Song of a Blackbird. It is a very powerful graphic novel inspired by her grandparents' experiences during the Nazi occupation of Amsterdam. She shares how discovering their hidden history led her to write this powerful story. Later in the show, Suzanne Jacobs-Lipshaw returns to Reading with Your Kids to celebrate her new picture book, The Super Volcano. Suzanne explains how her students inspired her to bring the wonders of Yellowstone National Park into her classroom through creative hands-on learning. You're going to love this episode, and we love that you are joining us. I think we're in for a real treat. I am really looking forward to celebrating Song of a Blackbird. It's a YA graphic novel by our guest. Please welcome to the show, Maria von Lieshout. Maria, how are you?
Thank you so much for having me, Jed. I am doing just wonderful. Today is actually the launch day for my book. So I'm delighted to kind of talk to you and share something about the book with you and with your listeners.
Well, I'm really happy. Congratulations on the book launching. It's, from what I've read from your notes and from the book description, this is a pretty powerful story about a couple of strong young women who live in different times.
Absolutely, yes. A couple of strong women and men also, men and women, but I decided to kind of write the story from the perspective of a young female artist in the Amsterdam resistance. And I came upon this story in 2011 when my grandmother passed away. My grandmother lived in Amsterdam. I'm also Dutch. I grew up in the Netherlands. And after she passed, we found several documents among her belongings that described in pretty detail what had happened during those years under Nazi occupation. So it talked about the fact that my grandparents' house was bombed, and the second document talked about everything my grandfather experienced while being part of the Amsterdam resistance. And truthfully, Jed, this was the first time that I learned about these stories because my grandparents never liked to talk about it. It was just something that whenever we asked, they changed the subject. They said it was too difficult. So much was lost. So many loved ones were lost. So they said, let's just look forward. Times are better now. Let's not revisit that time. So during their lifetime, my grandparents were not willing to talk about this. So when we found those documents after my grandmother passed, it was literally like finding a treasure because there was so much information. And it was truthfully so inspiring to read this. And it sent me on a years-long treasure hunt to find out more information and to connect with some of the descendants of the people that my grandfather had been in touch with during those years.
I think we forget, well, certainly I was, forgot that World War II and the Nazis affected a lot more than just the people in Germany and Poland and France. It really affected all of Europe and all of the world, but certainly all of Europe. And I can't imagine sitting back and discovering that my grandparents went through that on such a personal basis.
Yes, no, it is shocking. I mean, it wasn't like we didn't know. We of course we knew that my grandmother's childhood home had been bombed. I knew that my mother had talked about that, and we knew that my grandfather had been involved with the resistance and that he was very, very much and very outspoken against the Nazi regime, as were their parents. But because it wasn't talked about, we just never really wondered what exactly had happened. Until we found out, some of the stories, and that's when I took that as a starting point for my research, and reached out to people. And the more I reached out, and the more I read, and the more I researched and spent afternoons in the Amsterdam City Archives, the more involved I became. And I along the way I learned about this phenomenal bank heist that had basically happened during the Second World War, under the noses of the Nazis, because the Dutch National Bank had been taken over by the Nazis and was being controlled by the Nazis. So when a group that my grandfather was part of decided that the resistance needed a lot more money, this group plotted a bank heist, and they stole 50 million guilders, making it the greatest bank heist in European history, right under the noses of the Nazis. And that money was used to fund the resistance and to literally save tens of thousands of lives. Of course, when I discovered that story, I said, okay, I need to, I'm a writer, I'm an illustrator, I really want to do something with this.
Wow. What a story. So in your book, in the notes that you sent me, you're telling me there's two timelines in the story. One set in the World War II era and the other set in modern times. Tell us a little bit about the characters we're going to meet in the modern timeline, please.
Oh, good. Yes. The reason I felt it was important to do that is for the same reason I decided to make the book fictional, even though it stays fairly close to what actually happened in historic events. I wanted to make it fictional because I wanted to make the story accessible, especially for a younger audience. I also felt it was really important to make a bridge to today, to a more, to the present, to kind of illustrate that these things that happened to us, or things that happened to maybe our parents or our grandparents or great-grandparents, they don't stay in the past. They kind of live on, and they pulse through the generations. And by showing the two, the main character in the past is a young woman who saves a little boy and a little girl, a Jewish boy and a Jewish girl, from deportation. And in the timeline in the present, we meet those two people again, but in old age. And by doing that, I really wanted to show what the war does to people, not just in the moment, but over time.
Yeah, we've talked here on the podcast a lot about I don't know if trauma is the right word, but the experience that young kids had going through the pandemic, and the fact that, a 5-year-old or 5 or 6-year-old today spent, a third of his or her life locked up during the pandemic. And we think about all the consequences and that they're going to face. I have a feeling that pales in comparison to having your childhood house bombed and seeing your family and friends herded and, led away to concentration camps.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's all traumatic, right? And it all needs to be kind of talked about within families. I think a good thing about today's day and age is we as people are much more comfortable about talking about these types of things with our kids. I think, generations before us had a harder time. They just preferred to avoid difficult topics, which I believe perpetuates trauma and allows it to simmer, whereas talking about it and dealing with it and acknowledging it and addressing it helps give it a place and helps move it a bit. And I think that's very healthy. it was a very traumatic time. I mean, yes, for my mom, her house was bombed. Kids lived through extreme famine. That last winter was called the Hunger Winter because there was no food, there was no warmth. It was very, very, very grim. Loved ones were killed, were either executed or sent to concentration camps. And of course, then when the war was over and Holland was liberated, we all discovered that, well, we didn't, but the collective we, the people of the Netherlands, discovered that so many of our neighbors, our Jewish neighbors, our colleagues, our friends, had all been deported and murdered in the most gruesome way. So layer on top of this trauma also a tremendous guilt and shame. That's pretty much, and I think that's not in the past either. That is still going on today. And I think that also explains why people of that generation just had a harder time talking about it.
One of the things it just came into my life around Christmas time when I was speaking to my daughter and she told me I got into this big argument with this person that I know because he was saying that the Holocaust never happened.
Oh, God.
I can't comprehend that for anybody to say something like that when we have so much evidence.
Yes. Yes. Your daughter's friend is not unique, unfortunately. There was a poll in the Netherlands a few years ago among school children, like high school children and college-age children. And I think roughly a quarter, I think 22%, believed either the Holocaust didn't happen or it was exaggerated. And mind you, this is the grandchildren and great-grandchildren of people who actively experienced the war. So that is very, very troubling. And it's one of the reasons I felt so strongly about wanting to tell this story, because I believe stories are very important ways to keep memories and to keep our history alive. It also helped me decide to use actual authentic historic photographs in the book. I'm using about 100 historic photos that I got from either the Amsterdam City Archives or the NIOD, which is the archives that deals exclusively with war documentation. I use 100 photographs because those photographs are evidence. They don't lie. They show what happened. And the photographers that took these photos were actually very heroic because at the time, the Nazis strictly forbade photography. It was illegal and you could actually be arrested if you were found photographing, street scenes. But these very heroic photographers, part of a group called the Hidden Camera, they went out and they hid their cameras literally like under their coats or in their bags or in baby carriages, and secretly took photos of street scenes so it would be documented. So these photographs that I'm using in this book are actually acts of resistance, which I found so powerful. And for me, including them in the illustrations is a tribute to their photos and to the photographers that risked their lives taking them.
Is that one of the reasons that you chose to tell the story in a graphic novel?
Well, that was a process. It took me a long time. 2011 is when I discovered the documents, and I that started a period of about 4 years where all I was doing was reaching out to people and asking questions and reading books and trying to find out what had happened in Amsterdam during those years. And once I became really invested in that, I decided to make a book, but I wasn't quite sure what shape it would take. I was even open at the time about the possibility of just writing a novel, but I'm an illustrator first. I've always been an illustrator. So I was a little bit intimidated by that prospect until I realized doing the research that the role that artists had played in the resistance was so incredibly heroic and somewhat, they had remained somewhat anonymous. It had not really been known the role that these artists had played. I decided, well, that means that I'm going to write the story, make the story from the perspective of a young artist. And if I write it from the perspective of a young artist, then it's only logical if I use actual art to tell the story. And that's when I started considering the idea of a graphic novel, and I started talking to people that had experience there. And the more I thought about it and the more I talked about it, the more I became convinced that that was the best way to tell this story.
I would think that it would make the story all that more powerful to see the images, not only read the narrative, but to actually see the images and absolutely to see those photographs that were actually taken at the time.
Yeah, no, I like to believe so. I think, and I think especially younger audiences, they're so strong visually. I think if you can tell a story not just through words, but also through images, through illustration, through design, through typography, through photography, then you start firing on several different levels. And I think then it starts stimulating several parts of your brain. And I believe it's incredibly powerful. Yeah.
This is, you were mentioning beforehand, you think that this is a great book for kids 14 and up. Although there have been younger kids, I think not that you would have to do it, but I would think that this is a really powerful book to read together as a family, or to co-read and then come and sit down. What kind of conversations do you think families can have if they are experiencing the book together?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I love that. And I absolutely love the idea of families reading it together. And I think that's a wonderful thing to do. You know, I think it depends a lot on the age of the kids and where they are developmentally and what happens to be kind of the dinner table discussion anyway in those families. But I found that there's many touch points, like anything from, okay, what is our family history, right? Like, what are the questions that we can ask our grandma about, you know, the country where perhaps she immigrated from, or what life was like when she was young. I keep telling young people, you know, ask your parents, ask your grandparents to tell stories and record them, videotape them, audio tape them, because it's so important that those stories not be lost. So I think the book can be a really excellent springboard for those types of discussions and resolutions. But I think it can also be a good springboard for discussions about politics today. Like, if even the question, like, what is a democracy, right? What makes a democracy for children that are maybe a little bit older? And why is a democracy and fighting for democracy important? So kind of depending on where we are with our discussions, I think that those could all be had as an extension of this book. Fake news. I think I talk about propaganda a little bit, in the book. And, you know, basically, to me, propaganda is whenever, you know, words and images are used to divide others and to spread hate and fear. And even though we live in a different time where technology is a lot more advanced, that's still going on. And I think it's important for kids to recognize propaganda, and when especially media is being used to spread fear and hate of others, I think it's very important to have those conversations at the dinner table. So I'm hopeful that this book will contribute to those conversations as well.
We're big advocates of helping our kids become more media literate, to help them understand from a very young age that all of the media that they're consuming, that they're exposed to, was created by someone to get you to do something, whether it's to buy something or to believe in some way or to act in a certain way. And the earlier that we can help our kids understand that, the better. when I was taking a media literacy class, when my daughter was in the 8th grade, I remember that. And that was probably 15 years ago, maybe more. The thought was that kids were exposed to 3,000 media messages a day. I have to believe that has quadrupled.
Yes. Yeah, 15 years ago was ancient history in media land. Yeah. Yeah. No, when I see my son, my 15-year-old, and what he's exposed to, and it's hard because we as parents, we're not that savvy. We didn't grow up with this. So we're kind of doing the best we can and trying to moderate and trying to have discussions about difficult topics and trying to get them to think for themselves and to be very skeptical of all the messaging that's targeted right at them. Yeah, but it's it's a challenge for sure.
Now, I need to know, or I need to ask, how did you go from writing books like Bye Bye Binky and No More Tantrums and I Sleep in a Big Bed to telling the story of Song of a Blackbird?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and one I get asked on a regular basis. I think it has everything to do with inspiration. Ultimately, my graphic novel is about the power of art to fight hate, right? It's these very brave artists that use their skills and use their smarts to fight fascism and fight Nazism. So the theme of this book is the power of art to fight hate, and I used a blackbird as my narrator. The blackbird to me is a symbol of hope and a symbol of inspiration. So the book is in fact narrated by a blackbird. And I think that inspiration has everything to do with the question you just asked me. I rolled into children's books, into children's picture books, roughly 25 years ago, basically because of a profound love for kids literature. And, I was such a fan, and I just decided that this is what I wanted to do with my life. And so that's what I wanted. So that's what I did with my life. And I was happily kind of going along creating picture books until my grandmother passed away, and I found those documents, and I just became so inspired by these very heroic people that I learned about. And I just felt this very strong urge to do something with it. So in a way I had no choice. It just kind of happened to me. And I was along for the ride. It sounds a little bit strange, but I think inspiration happens that way. And so yes, I think inspiration is everywhere, and it's always kind of beckoning us, trying to get us to do things. And in this case, it beckoned me, and I kind of jumped on this. And at the time, I didn't realize how long it would take me, that it would take me well over a decade to complete the story and complete the art and get it to a place where I felt it was ready to go into the world. Had I known, I may never have started it, but I'm very happy where it is now. And so yeah, that's a long way of answering your question.
I love your answer. I think a lot of people hearing you say, well, I really didn't have any choice. The inspiration came and it just kind of took me. If they're not involved in the creative arts, they might not understand. I certainly understand, and can appreciate that. I'm curious. I believe I'm seeing on Amazon that the book has been translated into Dutch.
Yes, in fact, I did that myself because I am Dutch and I grew up in the Netherlands. My husband and I have lived here since '97, and our son was born here, but we moved back to the Netherlands for 2 years and just returned this past summer. So we came back partly because of family and partly to expose our son to a little bit of Dutch culture. But I used that time to work with a Dutch publisher and translate the work into Dutch. And it was translated. I had a wonderful publisher, I had a wonderful editor, and it came out in April. So it's my own words. I had a lot of help from a very strong editor, but I did do the translation myself, and it's been out there for a little while now. So that's been really exciting.
I'm curious. One of the things, I'm not fluent in Spanish, but I've performed in a number of Spanish-speaking countries, performed in Spanish, and whenever I'm on tour in a Spanish-speaking country, I try to think in Spanish, and I noticed that my perception of the way my perspective changes a bit. Not huge, but I notice I'm seeing things in a different way. As you were translating this story into Dutch, did that change the way you were perceiving the story and experiencing it?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, every language has its own feelings and its own expressions. And I think what I found is that I could not just translate it, because sometimes it just wouldn't, the sentiment, the feeling I was after in that moment would not feel right if I translated it literally into Dutch. So I at times had to reach for different words and slightly different ways of expressing that same thought in order to achieve the same result. And I have tremendous respect for translators, because it is very, very difficult. And it is not just about vocabulary and knowing and understanding the language. It is also really trying to get into the head of the author and trying to understand, okay, what is she trying to say and how can I best say that in this language? So I'm actually communicating now too with the German translator, because it's going to be translated into German. And she's reached out to me. She's wonderful. And with questions for clarification because of this. Like, she's trying to find the very best words in German, and those might not always be the most obvious words.
Very, very powerful. We should tell everybody where they can go to find out more about Song of a Blackbird and find out more about you.
Thank you. Yes. Well, they can go to my website. There's actually a web page called songofablackbird.com, where they can find out anything about Blackbird, like where to buy the book, some reviews. We've had some really amazing reviews, so they're listed there. A short synopsis, some pages from the book. So that's a really good place to start, and then you know that can take you to other places that you need to go in order to find out more.
We've had a really powerful time speaking to the author and illustrator of the young adult graphic novel Song of a Blackbird. Our guest has been Maria von Lieshoff. Maria, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Jed. It was a joy.
Before we invite our guest into the studio, I would love to invite you to visit a very special website. It's clownswithoutborders.org. Clownswithoutborders.org. This is a group that I absolutely adore. I am part of Clowns Without Borders, and I had the honor of being part of the 2023 tour of El Salvador. I had so much fun joining with artists from all over the world to bring a smile to people who really needed it and really appreciated it too. And we would love for you to join us as a monthly Joy Maker. The Joy Makers, they're a family of people just like you who love to laugh and make other people feel good. So please take a moment and visit clownswithoutborders.org and consider joining me as a Joy Maker. I'm very excited to welcome back our guest. She is here to celebrate her brand new picture book. It's called The Super Volcano. Please welcome back to the show, the super Suzanne Jacobs-Lipshaw. Hey, Suzanne, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks for that wonderful introduction.
I'm happy to have you on. This is your third visit, so I think that boosts you up to super status.
Well, I think you deserve that super status, too, for having all of us authors on all the time. We greatly appreciate it.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you to say. Talk to me about this. So I've heard about a supervolcano underneath Yellowstone Park, and I heard that when it erupts, we're done. where North America is done. So I haven't gone into it any deeper than that because it's terrifying. Should I be worried, or can you put my mind at ease?
I can put your mind at ease. Geologists monitor the supervolcano all the time. They are not predicting it to erupt for a long, 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 long time. And it's really the impetus for some remarkable things in the ecosystem that is Yellowstone. So my book tries to show you the powers of the supervolcano, but in a positive way, and the amazing things that it has created.
Now, I'm trying to picture this because I actually hiked up to the rim of an active volcano down in Costa Rica, and it was quite amazing. You could smell the sulfur. You could look down, and everything's kind of bubbling there. And as we're hiking up the volcano, we saw all these little shelters where you had to run to if the worst happened. And that was both kind of funny and terrifying at the same time. I'm trying to picture a volcano underground. Is it like in a cave and there's just this volcano sitting there waiting to pop?
Just basically picture the land, and then first of all, you have to know Yellowstone is massive, so it encompasses 3 states: Wyoming, Michigan, that's where I live, Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho, mostly, in Wyoming. And it's just sizzling and bubbling underneath. So what had happened was, when we picture a volcano, I'm doing things with my hands that I know the audience can't see, but we picture a volcano going up like a mountain with a hole at the top, typical cone volcano. The Yellowstone supervolcano is different than that. It is actually a volcano that collapsed in and to itself. And so all the heat and the magma and everything is down below the earth. And when you go to Yellowstone, there are various areas like mud pots that are bubbling like you would see in Costa Rica. And there's that sulfur smell. So all of that is still there, but it creates a very different landscape than what you had seen in Costa Rica. I had been there also. I've also been to a volcano in Hawaii. And they're very different landscapes. All 3 of them, actually.
Yeah. It's hard for me. So as you're walking in different parts of Yellowstone, you're actually walking on top of the bubbling magma and lava?
Technically, yes. Now, Yellowstone, of course, has done a tremendous job of working to keep their visitors very safe. They've created a lot of boardwalks for you to walk on to get you from place to place. And when there aren't boardwalks, you can be rest assured that you're not going to be walking on hot areas. Like, I know when I was in Hawaii and we were walking on the volcano, we had a guide who would walk ahead of us with very specific shoes to feel the heat and would tell us when we needed to stop. And I would never go on a volcano like that without a guide, because they know where you can go and where you can't. Yellowstone has it completely under control. You don't need a guide. They have paths where you can walk, and they have boardwalks to keep you away from the areas that could be dangerous.
Wow. So if you were to stray off those boardwalks, you would actually, the ground would be hot.
Yeah, you could really get yourself in major trouble if you don't stay on the boardwalks in the areas where they have them. The hot springs are extremely, extremely hot. They support bacteria that actually NASA is studying, because they believe they're going to find that same bacteria on Mars. So it's a very unique development. The hot springs themselves are circles of colors. So picture a deep blue in the middle and colors of the rainbow just emanating out from there in circles. And the hottest part is the middle of the hot spring, and the bacteria that can live in there produce that blue color. The edge is more of an orange, and the bacteria in there lives in a less hot, but still less hot comparatively to the one in the middle, but still extremely hot water. And that color emanates from the bacteria and creates the orange ring at the edge of the hot springs. So
Wow.
just creates a beautiful rainbow of colors in water, all from nature.
Nature is fascinating,
Absolutely.
and it really is. It's such a interesting time that we're living in because we have all this amazing technology. You and I, you're in Michigan, I'm in Massachusetts. We're able to see each other, talk to each other in real time. There's no, I don't want to jinx it, but there's no delay in our communication. But at the same time, a lot of this technology that is doing so much for us is taking us away from nature, and is, it's we're glued to our screen instead of enjoying and experiencing all the beauty that's around us sometimes.
And there's so much to explore, even in your backyard, a neighborhood park. You need to get out. My girlfriend and I walk a trail every Sunday. We've been doing it. We wish we kept track. It's got to be at least 15 years. We see deer, we see turtles in the summer laying their eggs, and it doesn't matter how many times we see them. We're still in awe. This is life happening. This is nature happening. We live in an area with snow. The snow attaches to the trees, and it's a different beauty than it is in the fall when the leaves are changing. But, you get out there, and the other thing you need to do when you get out in nature, you need to look and you need to listen. Otherwise, you'll miss a lot.
Yeah. I was reading somewhere that you were inspired to write this book because of your students.
Yes. So actually, 3 of my books, 2 that are already out and 1 that's coming out next year, are inspired by year-long units that I taught my struggling readers in elementary school. So what I wanted to do, actually, back in, I'd have to look up even when it was, but it was easily 15 years ago, when I spent a summer at Yellowstone National Park with my family. That summer, I was tasked with trying to figure out how I was going to get more nonfiction into my teaching, because that was a mandate that had come out when Common Core was just being developed. And teachers are thinking all summer long about what they're going to do to better their teaching for their students. And this was something that I knew I really needed to focus on, because I didn't do a lot of it. And I wasn't really sure how excited my kids were going to get about reading more nonfiction.
Mm-hmm.
Which was totally wrong, because now I write all nonfiction, because nonfiction is so cool. There are so many amazing nonfiction books presented in incredibly creative ways. And it really was a great eye-opening experience for me on a lot of levels.
Mm-hmm.
Back to my students, when I was going through Yellowstone, I just was in awe of everything I was seeing. I, saw the hot springs, and I'm thinking, oh, my students would love this, and I'm taking pictures. And then you've got the mud pots where it's just gurgling, and it stinks from that sulfur, which makes like a rotten egg smell, and it's all muddy and gross and slimy looking, and I'm taking pictures of that. And then you have the geysers spurting up with the water everywhere. Everything was incredible. And then I'm like, and this is all caused by a volcano that's hidden underground. My kids would just love this. So one of the days with my family, we went on a kayaking trip with a guide, and we just had 2 other people in our group, and it turned out it was a husband and wife, and the wife was an author who had written 2 books about Yellowstone and was there because she was going to be signing her books. So I was telling her what I was thinking about and that I thought my kids would just be amazed. And she gave me copies of her book, Plus she had 2 educational guides. And I was like, this is what I need to do. I need to turn my classroom into Yellowstone National Park next year. So I went home, created all these amazing decorations, put them all around the room, and I basically used that to engage and motivate my students. And we started out with just some general talk about national parks. And what I did was 2 days a week, because I only had my students for maybe anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour a day. Otherwise, they were mainstreamed in their regular classroom. And for 2 days a week, I would work with them on whatever skill I was teaching them. It could be how to divide multisyllable words. And then the other 2 days a week, we'd dive into all these incredible nonfiction books and articles and websites that I could find about Yellowstone. And the kids would have to practice whatever strategy they were working on and, read. So there was always something that they were reading for. And they really just seemed to enjoy the whole concept. And this went on for a year. We focused on the different animals at Yellowstone. We did a long distance field trip to Yellowstone National Park before anybody was doing those kinds of field trips. This was way before COVID. So they were transported there. Super cool. So at the end, I'm thinking, year's over. This was a lot of fun, not ready to really focus on next year yet. 4 of my boys come up to my desk and said, so Mrs. Lipshaw, what's the theme going to be next year? And I'm like, you'll have to come to the room and see how it's decorated next year. And that was the start of a whole new way for me to teach. And I did a lot of project-based learning that I added into that. And it just grew and grew. And it was incredibly engaging and motivating for my students. My Mighty Mahi book was written because of the turtle that my students adopted and actually taught the whole entire school about the threats to sea turtles and raised $1,700 on a fundraiser that, these struggling readers, became leaders that they hosted for the entire school. And it really was a motivating experience for them and a reason for them to read and to want to read and to enjoy what they were reading. And it was great. All thanks to my trip in Yellowstone.
Well, that's, it's really fantastic when a teacher is able to motivate kids to the point where they're excited to go into a class and to start learning. And what a beautiful gift you gave to those kids.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It was a gift for me too, because it really put a lot of the creativity back into teaching. I have to say I was very fortunate that my principal and my directors were very supportive and very behind my endeavors because they were a little unique. Mm-hmm. And sometimes, unfortunately, education's missing some of that unique spin, and it was really great to be able to do that.
One of the things that we've talked about too with author teachers over the last couple of years is just how limited they are in terms of being able to be creative. I mean, I've heard that that there are some schools where teachers actually are handed a script that they are expected to use in teaching, and they're not supposed to veer off the script. And I can't think of a less interesting way to learn.
No, because sometimes the best learning happens with what's unexpected. When a student asks you a question that might take you on a complete tangent, but that tangent creates learning that you never even would have thought of, because it's the kids, right? I feel the teacher is a leader and a coach, but you have to listen to what your kids are saying, your students, and let them lead you to what they need and what they want to learn about. Mm-hmm. Granted, I had a little more leeway in that because I'm not stuck to the same type of curriculum that a general education teacher would have to stick with. but they still should be able to go off on the tangents because teachers are professionals. And when they see that learning possibility, a good teacher is going to jump on that and go with it.
And I think we forget sometimes that while, yes, there are certain basics every kid needs to learn and come away with, ultimately what we're trying to do in schools is to just get kids interested in learning and helping them become lifelong learners.
Absolutely. Lifelong learners, lifelong readers, problem solvers, critical thinking, a lot of skills that kids need to graduate school with.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And what a fascinating place, Yellowstone. We had a guest on probably 6-7 months ago, Laurie Bischoff, who lives just 20 minutes from Yellowstone, one of the entrances to Yellowstone.
Oh, I'm jealous.
Yeah, well, she was telling me it is such a beautiful spot, and it sounds really unique. Are there any other underground volcanoes that we're aware of?
Yeah, there's other existing ones across, the world. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head actually where any of them are. I know I do mention a few of them in the back matter of my book, but there are a limited number of super volcanoes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And this is definitely a super volcano. So now you said that the geologists, they're monitoring it and they don't expect this to erupt for decades or centuries?
Centuries.
Okay.
More than centuries.
We can relax.
Beyond centuries.
Relax a little bit. It's just, I'm so happy that you shared your experience, that year in the classroom, because I think it's obviously a great, lesson for teachers and aspiring teachers, but it's also, I think, something that we can do as parents in our home. And when we visit someplace or if we're learning about something, if we're reading Super Volcano together, obviously we can have discussions about it, but boy, it'd be really fun to kind of recreate a super volcano in your home, just to get kids really interested in geology and in nature.
And that's what's so great about the nonfiction books that are out. I mean, there's a lot of STEM, there's a lot of biographies, and a lot of history. So you can find a lot of things that your kids will relate to and that maybe they want to take to the next step. Mm-hmm. Super Volcano is a little bit easier. You get out one of those volcano kits or you just Google how to make the volcano. But then, okay, now let's smash it somehow, once it cools off and turn it into more of a caldera type, so you can actually see those differences.
Yeah. Now, you were sharing with me before we started recording that Super Volcano is printed on, I don't know if I'm saying that right, but there's different layers to the books.
Yes.
It's not just to sit down, just read from start to finish. It's really unique in that way.
So, a challenge of a lot of authors, especially when you're writing a book about something that's been written about a lot, like Yellowstone National Park, is finding a unique spin. A publisher is not going to take your book if it is the same old, trope that they've seen before. And a lot of these are really great. You've got an animal that's the park ranger leading you through to see, the kids through to see the different things in the park. That was fabulous. If I was the first one to come up with that, that would have been tremendous, but that was already came up with. So now I needed to come up with a different take. And it took me a long time to figure out the best way to do that. First, I came up with the idea of people referred to the super volcano as a sleeping giant. And I did some research and found out somebody just a couple years ago came out with a wonderful book called Volcano Dreams that basically compares the volcano to a sleeping giant. Can't go that route. And so suddenly it just hit me. Super volcano, super place to visit, superhero. It really is like a superhero that has these incredible powers, and it has created an environment that is unlike basically anywhere else. And it's not just the hydrothermal features, the geyser and the mud pots and the hot springs, but it's also the nature that can live there. So in the winter, Yellowstone Lake does not freeze over because there's all that heat under there. So trumpeter swans can come and live there in the winter because they can still get their food and have, a place to be. It supports different vegetation. It supports that bacteria we talked about in the hot springs. So I took a unique take and I wrote it in 2 layers. So the first is like a comic book layer that just gives some basic fun information with those sound words. I mean, I grew up with Batman on TV long before anybody probably listening to this podcast did. And you would see the word boom and splat and pow all over the screen. So I had that in my head when I wrote the top layer. And, the geysers hiss and the mud pots blurp and glurp. And so you have all those fun sound words. Then on each page is a second layer that gives additional information, a little more technical, but still written in a way that a child can understand about whatever feature it is I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. And then my publisher, Science Naturally, was fabulous. They loved the comic book idea and took that to the level by boxing out the main words and having little comic book type panels inserted. But they also wanted to show the beauty of the landscapes. And so I have double page spreads of every single landscape that's in there. And that extended the book to 40 pages when a typical picture book is usually 32. So that was really wonderful. And Bree Schmida was my illustrator, and she did an incredible job on the landscapes and, including the text for the sound words as part of her illustrations. She actually used to work for Marvel Studios, just coincidentally. So she had a little bit of that animation experience in her.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, it sounds like a fantastic book. I can think of some young people in the neighborhood here who I think would really jump on and get excited about this book and about learning more about volcanoes. What's next for you, Suzanne? Do you have another project in the works right now?
I do. So actually I have 2 books coming out either the end of 2025 or the beginning of 2026. One is about a mini satellite that's about the size of a loaf of bread. It's called a CubeSat, and that is made by the University of Michigan, their students, and is out taking data on space weather. So that one is coming out soon, and that is also a picture book. And then my first fiction, middle grade, is actually coming out. And it involves rock climbing and secret codes and Marquette, Michigan, and the Upper Peninsula is where it takes place. And it's really about 2 brothers who, one is autistic, and his older brother and him never really connected well. Unfortunately, their mom dies, so it's a little sad, but that's mostly at the beginning, and it's a lot about how they learn to use their passions to connect with each other and to heal after their mom passes away.
Well, you have an open invitation to come back and celebrate those books when they're out there.
Appreciate that. I'd love to. One of my favorite podcasts to be on.
Suzanne, tell everybody where they can go to find out more about Supervolcano and more about you.
If you want to find out more about me and Supervolcano, you can go to my website, which is www.suzannejacobslipshaw.com. You can go onto the Science Naturally website to find out more about the supervolcano, and of course, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, any of those websites, and go into the library, request the book, go into a bookstore. If they don't have it, request it, and get your hands on a copy. Again, libraries are a great place to find books.
Awesome. Absolutely. We've had a great time speaking about The Supervolcano. It's the brand new nonfiction picture book from our guest, Suzanne Jacobs Lipshaw. Suzanne, thanks so much for being back on Reading with Your Kids.
Thanks so much, Jed.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Reading with Your Kids, and we hope you'll join us for the next exciting episode of the show. In the meantime, please connect with us on social media, facebook.com/readingwithyourkids, @readingwithyourkids on Instagram, and @JedleyMagic on Twitter. We have a great YouTube channel, youtube.com/readingwithyourkids. You can find most of our Reading with Your Kids episodes on our YouTube channel. You can also find our Drawing with Your Kids and our STEM is Family Fun videos. And of course, you are most welcome to visit readingwithyourkids.com. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful, starting with our guest, Maria von Leishout. Please be sure to check out Song of a Blackbird. And Suzanne Jacob Lipshaw. Please be sure to check out The Supervolcano. I want to thank my amazing team, Fatima Khan, Chris Doherty, Rory Grady. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to say thank you to you. Thank you for taking time to listen to the show today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place. And you do that every time you read with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next episode of Reading with Your Kids.